Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience. Chicken sandwich with cheese, sandwiches with caviar, coffee, champagne. Would you like anything? Jenny walked around the first-class cabin of the huge plane where she worked as a flight attendant with a charming smile. Jenny was an experienced employee, and at a glance she could tell if her passengers were in need of something. She didn't even need to look at her watch to know when it was time for her to go out to the guests of the flight. Honey, champagne, please. An elderly man in a business suit called out to her, obviously flying on some business from St. Petersburg to London. He was sitting by the window reading the latest issue of the English press when Jenny walked down the aisle, pushing a cart full of starters and main courses in front of her. Of course, just a minute, the girl said with the same smile. After that, very deftly, she pulled a bottle of champagne from the bottom compartment of the cart and carried it into the office. Quickly and almost without a fling, she opened it, then poured the golden drink into a crystal glass and brought it to the businessman. "Thank you, Jenny, you were just lovely," thanked the man, and again plunged into reading. Jenny truly loved her job. She served on board an airliner for the 4th year now, and during all this time she never regretted her choice. Boundless skies, beautiful shape, the opportunity to see other countries, and a variety of time zones. All this allowed her to feel free at the same time and distract her soul from all sorts of topical problems, anxiety and worries, which Jenny, alas, had plenty of. After finishing delivering drinks and snacks, Jenny returned to her workplace. Putting down the cart, she looked at herself in the mirror, the straightened strands of hair that had come out of her hair. Jenny was very attractive. Leggy beauty, 28 years old, with shiny brown hair and dark green eyes like juicy summer grass. Her smile made men tremble with delight and women silently sigh with envy. However, there was something in her appearance that caused deep complexes of the young stewardess. Jenny looked at her left hand with a sigh, where the middle finger was about 2 knuckles shorter than all the others. The girl specially painted her nails herself, with the calmest neutral color varnish, and never did a manicure in salons. Embarrassed by this, as it seemed to her, a very noticeable physical defect. For the same reason, Jenny almost did not wear rings, did not want to draw attention to her long fingers like those of a professional pianist. Against their background, this short man, as the girl herself called him, stood out terribly for his absurdity. The only exception was a modest gold wedding ring, which the stewardess wore on the ring finger of her left hand. It was the last thing she remembered from her late husband, Philip. Looking at the ring, Jenny again involuntarily plunged into her own memories. Philip died a little over a year ago. Ironically, a week before her death, her husband took out a loan at an incredibly high interest rate, and now Jenny had to pay it alone. For a young stewardess, this amount of almost 20 million turned out to be simply unbearable. And every time she thought about it, Jenny was immediately overtaken by hysteria and wild horror. This is because this loan was not taken from a bank, with which one could still try to somehow negotiate. And very dangerous people, representatives of the criminal stratum of the city. Even now, after a little over a year, Jenny could not give all the money to these terrible people. Those constantly called the girl, demanding from her the ill-fated debt. Jenny still did not understand what could push Philip to turn to these thugs for money. And most importantly, why did he need such a truly astronomical amount? In the last month, the bandits have completely gone off the chain. They began to write on the wall next to the stewardess's house terrible threats, or guard her on the way from the airport to the house, following her taxi in their big black SUVs with tinted windows. It is clear that their main goal was to intimidate the young widow so that she could not think of anything else but to give them their damn money. And I must say they were simply brilliant at exerting this kind of influence. Well, Pa, "How long does my boss have to wait for his money?" asked Jenny, a tall, broad-shouldered and completely bald hulk who had run away, once an unfortunate stewardess in an alley near her home. Jenny was then returning from the next flight and could not even imagine how terrible a surprise awaited her. "I gave you another 50,000 last week. I just don't have any more." "Try to get out of his stone grip, Jenny. I explained to you already 100 times. I have no opportunity to collect such large sums in such a short time." Ambal just smiled wryly. "You're confusing something, Paul. The boss, well, was too soft on you. He allowed me to repay the debt in parts, and even a whole year. But time is ticking, and we have not even come close to half of the indicated amount. But you get as much interest each time as I am able to give you now," Jenny said, looking at the thugs with a pleading in her eyes. "Even if I sell my apartment, this will still not be enough, and you understand this very well." Then the bouncer extended his huge index finger and slowly stroked Jenny's cheek. The feeling made her feel sick immediately, especially since the fingers of the bastards were unbearably struck by thick tobacco. "That's what a beauty," the collector said in a low voice. "The chief asked you to tell that if by the next our meeting you don't have all the missing amounts on hand, then he will help you give it to others in a much more pleasant and easy way." The man smiled slyly, and Jenny's heart immediately sank somewhere down. "No, you won't dare," she said, looking at the kingpin with inexpressible horror in her eyes. "Then I'll report to the police and they'll put you all in jail." Instead of answering, the villain laughed out loud, and in the next second, he briefly punched Jenny in the stomach with such force that the girl felt as if all the spirit had been knocked out of her at once. She doubled over and gasped for the cool autumn air with her open mouth. But oxygen stubbornly did not want to penetrate into her lungs, burning with pain. "Don't squirm. You're a bitch," the bandit growled. "If you even blurted out a word with a cop, we'll arrange such a circular adventure for you. Understood me?" Kingpin grabbed Jenny by the chin and forced him to look at his small eyes, full of anger and hatred for the entire female sex. "Got it!" he shouted again. "Understood," the stewardess said in a weak voice, writhing in his arms from pain and fear. "Tell me, how much time do I have?" "Now that's another conversation," the bandit said almost good-naturedly. Then he put the girl on her feet so easily, as if she weighed nothing at all. "I would immediately start solving problems in such a constructive way. None of this would be happening to you right now." Jenny gave him a scowling look of physical contempt and leaned cautiously against the wall of the house. As for the collector, with a business-like air, he took out a small diary from his pocket and marked some date in it with a pencil. Jenny stood all this time, holding her stomach and looking at the scoundrel in silent expectation. "You have 2 weeks," he finally said. After that, with a dull sound, the diary slammed shut. "If you don't take the rest of the amount during this time, you can prepare for a meeting with my boss, and I assure you it's best to be gentle with him. Otherwise, we will sell you into slavery to the Turks. There are such tender dolls like you are very fond of." Kingpin smiled at Jenny in parting with a predatory smile, like a grin of a jackal, after which, without haste, he climbed into his black SUV and disappeared into the night. As soon as his car drove off, Jenny was seized by such despair from which she was ready to literally tear her hair out. Tears and sobs from the hopelessness of their own situation. The girl struggled up to her apartment along the way, holding onto the railing so as not to fall. Jenny did not know where she could get the rest of the amount, but she objectively understood that even if she asked for a loan from her superiors, it was unlikely that the company would be able to meet them halfway. Yet it was not even hundreds of 1,000, but 1 million. "Philip Wellston, how did you put me like that?" Jenny cried, looking at her husband's photograph in a mourning frame. "Where can I get money now? Lord, it's scary to even imagine what they can't do to me." Philip Wellston was a businessman. Not so that he earns 1 million straight, but he still had some decent income. At the same time, the man tried to conduct several types of entrepreneurial activities at once, ranging from small markets near country roads to a network of production for the manufacture of steel doors. Of course, all this required money, and a lot of it. The young businessman was ready to spend day and night at his enterprises, trying to control every step, which the local managers and leading managers really did not like. So it turned out that Philip, every time, without knowing it, burned out on trust. He invested a lot of money and time in his companies, but every time he was wrong about people. The cunning manager somehow managed to rob the businessman's company. Then the business suffered inevitable losses, and Wellston had to start all over again. When most of the money ran out and it became trivial for Philip to correct his business mistakes, he ventured to take a huge loan from a certain Mexican authority. The banks no longer trusted Jenny's husband, unlike the criminal head, who willingly agreed to lend Philip money. The naive businessman believed that he could inject enough money into each of his companies to bring them to life and begin to turn a profit, and Philip planned to pay the debt to the authority from her. Yes, but fate decreed otherwise. The most surprising thing was that despite her husband's failures in business, Jenny still loved him with all her heart. Philip was smart, gentle, kind, with the most ideal man in the world, and Jenny grieved terribly for him. Even now, after so much time, she could not fully believe that he was no longer around, and that his car would never again stop near the house in which they had a spacious and beautiful apartment. Most of all, Jenny was upset by the fact that they had not had time to give birth to children in 2 years of marriage. If she had a son or daughter from Philip, then perhaps she would have endured all this much easier. No, the stewardess shook her head. Given the history of this debt, who knows what danger a child could be exposed to? It's probably even better that I didn't have time to give birth. Remembering what a terrible death her husband died, Jenny sadly shook her head every time. God forbid anyone, even the enemies of such a terrible finale of their lives. Philip then went for the weekend to their country guest house. Xenia said that he supposedly wants to be alone for a while, to think about his life, about how best to manage the money received from creditors. Jenny invited her husband to go with him. However, Filippo politely refused. Don't worry, Jenny. Well, judge for yourself. What are you going to do there? Have you just returned from a flight? You need to rest. And I'll cook a barbecue for myself. Fill up a stronger seagull, and think about how to save my business. An anxious shadow flickered across her face. She felt in her gut that it would be better for him not to go anywhere alone. Philip, I'm afraid. Honestly, Jenny admitted to him. These people, this Michael, he's the real criminal. Maybe he's following you. You don't know. Philip just laughed softly. Jenny, my good girl, have you read the books? Michael is the most ordinary businessman just like me, or any other person who manages several large companies at once. Yes, he had some connections with the underworld in the past, but that was all a long time ago. Now his reputation is almost crystal clear. Jenny looked at her husband doubtfully. Practical is the key word here. Who knows? And can he be trusted? You talk about him like he's the kindest soul. But this is far from being the case. How many raider attacks did he make last year? Philip angrily turned away from his wife. Don't start, please. If you believe everything that is said in the news, then it will not take long to earn money for yourself. In addition, in those cases, Michael is only a witness. Everyone, Jenny, let's not discuss my partner's business background. Okay, Jenny then pursed her lips in an offended tone, but said quietly, as you know, Phil. But I just want my husband to live with me for many more happy years, and you are literally being dragged into some kind of bad story. The couple quarreled that evening over this ill-fated loan, because Jenny didn't want to let him go out of town alone. However, Philip has always been a stubborn person by nature, so he did not listen to his wife, but collected his sports bag. And the next morning I went to my country villa. Jenny has been terribly nervous all day, and as it turned out, not in vain. Toward evening, Philip finally stopped communicating. She felt that something terrible had happened. However, until the last, she continued to wait and believe that this was all just her own speculation. For when her husband did not return home the next morning, Jenny realized that her intuition had not failed her. Philip's phone was turned off, and she felt an unpleasant chill run down her back. God, please, if only he was alive. As soon as the young woman thought about it, her phone interrupted from an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, so Jenny's heart immediately sank somewhere down. "Hello?" she said in a voice trembling with excitement. "Jenny?" An unfamiliar male voice asked her from the other end of the wire. "This is Captain Banks. I have sad news for you. Your husband, Philip Wellston, died last night in a fire that broke out in your country house." Jenny's legs buckled, and if not for the chair standing nearby, she would certainly have fallen to the floor. Jenny brought her hand to her lips, trying to suppress a moan. "God," was all she could whisper. "How?" "Experts have established that it was an accident," explained the policeman. "By all appearances, your husband overlooked the container with the lighter fluid and it exploded." "What?" "No." "Now, that can't be," Jenny protested. "My husband has always been an extremely cautious man. He would never leave liquid near a fire." The captain yelled, slightly annoyed, before answering. "Jenny, I'm only saying what has been confirmed. Facts are such a thing. You can't argue with them. Your husband barbecued on the grill, and the grill was in the garage under the roof. Apparently, the spark from the coals first hit the jar of liquid, and then the fire spread throughout the room. That is, our house also burned down," the young woman clarified, amazed. The policeman sighed noisily and answered in the affirmative. "Your cottage is surrounded by forest from 3 sides. Because of this, the most, I beg your pardon, favorable conditions for a fire were created. The fire spread from the garage to the interior of the house, and everything burned to the ground. Sorry, I understand that it is difficult for you now to accept the very fact of the death of your husband and the complete destruction of your country house. But what happened was only a series of failures under the circumstances, and only no one is to blame for the fact that it happened, and you should not blame yourself either. I wanted to go with him." Jenny sobbed into the phone. "I wanted to be near him." "Calm down, please," the captain said softly. "If you had been there with your husband, you would have died in the same way. You two simply wouldn't have a chance to survive. I understand that this is now small consolation, but at least you survived." After this conversation, Jenny could not close her eyes and spent the whole night staring at the ceiling. She did not want to believe that Philip was no more. This death is so terrible and ridiculous. It seemed that Jenny's very strange nonchalance, which the policeman spoke of, was completely out of character for her husband. And in the end, Jenny began to suspect that Philip was killed just because of the very money borrowed from the authority. Her husband's funeral was very modest. After all, there was absolutely nothing left of Philip, and just an empty coffin had to be lowered into the ground. Jenny couldn't sleep for almost a month, time after time returning thoughts to Deathwife. It was the only thing that helped her take her mind off it all. This is work, and Jenny continued to go on one flight after another, almost not noticing how quickly the dates on the calendar were changing. And then the threatening calls started, and the woman found out that she now had to pay off the loan for her late husband. Jenny at first thought that she would give them the bag of money that Filippov brought from them on the day the loan was processed. However, breaking the whole apartment and checking all the accounts, Jenny came to the eerie conclusion that there is no money anywhere. It was then that she remembered that her husband was leaving for the country with that same bag. Means, the woman thought to herself, Phil wanted to hide the money in the country. But they most likely burned down in this monstrous fire. Jenny felt her soul tremble with fear. She could not imagine how she could pay the bandit such a huge amount. Risking my own life, she asked to see Michael. When she was brought to his mansion, Jenny thought she would never get out of there alive again. The authority, seeing the beautiful wife of his late borrower, immediately softened his anger at Mercy and gave Jenny a deferment on the debt for a period of 1 year. And now the time has come to an end, and the poor woman still couldn't pay half of her debt. That is why she began to work almost 7 days a week, hoping in this way to earn as much money as possible, until the moment when Michael's minions again get to her. Jenny grew up in a village in one of the remote Texas ranches. Her parents were simple people, but honest and loving each other. The girl's father, Adam, served as a huntsman. Despite his considerable age, the man was still full of strength and could easily withstand many kilometers of detours through the forest area. Mother Mary worked at the village post office. She delivered letters and newspapers to all the inhabitants of their old and more populous village every year. Both spouses loved their work and considered it extremely important, and therefore there were almost never serious disputes between them as to whose role in the family was considered more significant. For as long as Jenny can remember, their homes have always reigned love and understanding. Yes, and her parents raised her exclusively on their own examples, trying to be a kind of role model for their daughter. The girl never heard a rude or evil word addressed to her, but she always found support and good advice if she needed any. After school, Jenny realized that, alas, there were no prospects for her on remote ranches. The girl wanted to learn foreign languages, but where could they be applied in such a remote place? In addition, Jenny had another dream, to talk about which yesterday's graduate was initially afraid, even of her parents. Jenny has been beckoning the sky since childhood. Being a very little girl, she could spend hours admiring the traces of planes that had flown in the sky, dreaming and wondering what was inside there. Inside such small ones, when viewed from below, and such huge ones when viewed from below, and such huge ones it was worth seeing them up close in air cars. The girl's parents never flew on liners. Jenny has never even been to the sea. That is why the passion for travel, coupled with the ability to rise high above the ground, gave rise to her passionate dream of becoming a flight attendant. Nevertheless, the father and mother, realizing that their daughter needed a higher education with a calm soul, let her go to the city. Jenny thought that learning languages was now a priority for her anyway. Then, as soon as you finally settle down in the capital, you can think about the career of an air conductor. And so it happened. After graduating from the Institute with honors, Jenny became a certified translator from 2 languages, French and Spanish, at once. This opened the door for her to a world of brilliant, high-paying work. So for some time the girl really worked as a secretary of a referent with the functions of an interpreter, working for a very prestigious media company. Jenny was able to rent a beautiful apartment in the city center and felt absolutely great. But she still sometimes dreamed at night of the sky and the new uniform of a stewardess. After working at that company for about 2 years, she realized that she could no longer ignore her dream. It was then that Jenny finally decided to try to enroll in flight attendant courses. The girl studied diligently and crammed. Alas, the necessary material for days, ignoring parties and walks with friends. But the result of her efforts was exactly what she wanted. Jenny passed the final exam with excellent marks and got the opportunity to get her dream job. Fortunately, her health has always been excellent, and her incredibly attractive appearance allowed her to easily pass the unspoken face control, which was an integral part of employment for this job. On his first flight, Jenny felt an incomparable delight. Feelings overwhelmed her, and unable to withstand their pressure, she even quietly burst into tears until no one saw her oldest innermost. Dream came true, and for the first time since graduation, Jenny felt in her place. On one of the flights, the girl just met Philip. The young man was only 3 years older than her and flew to another city to conclude a business deal. Both felt that they liked each other. However, decency forced them to wait until the end of the flight. Only then did Philip dare to approach the beautiful young stewardess and invite her to dinner at a restaurant. "Please don't refuse." Philip looked at her with a mute prayer in his eyes. "I know it will seem strange to you, but as soon as I saw you, I immediately understood this girl. I just have to try to get acquainted." Philip's embarrassed smile that accompanied these words made Jenny herself blush at first and then laugh lightly. "If you think that our meeting is a sign, then I definitely have no right to refuse you." The first meeting was soon followed by the second, and now a stormy and tender romance broke out between the young people. Jenny then experienced the most incredible emotion. After all, she could not even imagine that she would be lucky enough to meet a person on her way whose soul seems to be the second half of her own. Philip understood the girl so well that it sometimes seemed to Jenny that everything that happened to her was a fabulous dream. Now, standing in front of the mirror in the steward's quarters, Jenny thought that life with Philip had been the happiest time of her life. It is unlikely that she will ever meet a person with similar spiritual qualities. Her husband was for her not just a partner with whom she agreed to spend the next years of her life. He was her friend, and with the most passionate lover and like-minded person, always ready to support in difficult times. All the more terrible was their last parting, when one stupid quarrel forced the loving spouses to spend that night before his trip to the dacha separately. Jenny wanted to sit down in her seat in the aisle when suddenly the plane began to shake mercilessly. The light in the cabin flickered and immediately heard the loud voices of passengers, full of discontent and fear. "Lord, we are falling," a woman shouted. "What's happening?" "Stewardess. Where is the stewardess?" I heard the voice of an elderly man. "Mom, I'm scared." "Are we going to die?" yelled a childish voice somewhere very close to Jenny. Jenny herself immediately realized that they were in a zone of turbulence. This had happened to her many times already, and still each of them, a young stewardess, was a little scared. However, she did not have the right to show her feelings in front of the passengers, as this would be an absolute violation of all rules of conduct for personnel on board. After taking a few deep breaths, the woman moved into the salon and tried to keep her face completely unperturbed. Not only that, Jenny dazzlingly smiled at everyone, past which chair she passed with requests to buckle up and remain calm. "Why are we shaking so much?" The same businessman who recently ordered champagne from her was indignant. "Are you definitely telling us the truth, or are you just trying to stretch the time until we find out that 100 meters are left to fly to the ground and we can begin to say goodbye to life in advance?" "Do not worry. This sometimes happens during a flight." Jenny tried to reassure. "The turbulent zone will end soon, and we will continue our path calmly. There is absolutely no reason to be excited." The businessman muttered something displeased in response, but still securely fixed it behind the wall from his seatbelt. Walking a little further, Jenny drew attention to a beautiful scholarship lady of about 50. The woman was dressed in an expensive coral-colored suit and held a luxurious leather handbag in a delicate cream shade on her knees. Jenny immediately realized that this woman was very rich. Her manicure styling, as well as beautiful shoes from the latest collections of the famous fashion house, spoke for themselves. However, no matter how much money she had, this woman was primarily an ordinary person. And like all the passengers of this flight, she was now experiencing genuine fear. At that moment, when the stewardess was level with her seat, the plane again shook violently. The lady screamed loudly and dropped her purse on the floor. Jenny instinctively bent down, easily picking up the dainty accessory, then handed it to the passenger, keeping a polite smile on his face. "Thank you," the lady said with pale lips. And then her eyes fell on the left hand, the stewardess, with which she had her bag. The woman instantly cheered up and looked at Jenny with a dumb question. She immediately recognized this finger. The only one, shorter than all the others. Jenny, in an almost colorless voice, whispered to the stunned passenger, "Ah, that was the name of that rich woman." You suddenly felt how your whole body was pierced with electric current. For a few seconds, everything seemed to turn black before your eyes, and you decided with fear that now, at an uneven hour, you would faint. Yes, I understand that you are scared, but everything will end very soon. Honestly, the young woman promised her, it remains quite a bit to be patient. After that, smiling at Anna, the stewardess calmly walked further into the cabin. As soon as she disappeared from sight, the lady somehow grabbed her heart. God, it can't be. Alive and flying, now in the same plane with me, Anna thought. Is it really her? Although, who else can have such a specific feature? The woman hardly waited for the moment when the aircraft passed the turbulent zone and everyone finally calmed down. Taking a few deep breaths, Anna got up from her chair and made her way straight into the corridor where the stewardesses were sitting. Jenny was discussing something with her partner when she caught the startled gaze of the wealthy passenger. "Are you feeling better?" Jenny asked politely, looking at the woman with sincere care and concern. "Yes, thank you," she said slowly, and from excitement literally fit her nails into her small purse. "Sorry, maybe it's not supposed to do this, but I really need to talk to you. Could you give me a couple of minutes?" Jenny looked at each other embarrassedly from the second stewardess and nodded. "Fine. Sit down, please." Jenny's partner immediately got up from her seat and went to the salon to check if the other passengers needed anything. Anna sat down on the very edge of the seat and continued to turn her purse in her hands in silence for several seconds. The woman just didn't know where to start. What she was about to tell this young woman might seem like sheer nonsense to others, but still, she couldn't afford to miss the chance. Who knows, maybe she wasn't wrong. You see, Anna began to be very embarrassed. "It just so happened that I noticed a certain feature on your hand, your finger." It was Jenny's turn to blush in embarrassment. The young woman instinctively clenched her left hand into a fist so that the shortened phalanx was not visible. "Yes, I understand. It must be unpleasant for you to see this, but I have it since birth, and there is nothing I can do about it." The lady shook her head emphatically. No, what are you? That's not the point at all. I didn't even think to offend or humiliate you somehow. In no case." Jenny looked at her somewhat confused. "But then what is it that makes you so excited?" Anna took a deep breath and decided to tell. "You see, I lost my daughter many years ago. She was then only 3 years old. My husband, the girl's stepfather, was traveling with her to another city, and they had an accident. The husband could not cope with the control, and the car took out into a ditch. When Quentin woke up, his daughter was nowhere to be found. He, being wounded, walked around the neighborhood but did not find her, like sinking into the water. Even now, almost 30 years later, the memories of the lost child caused Anna almost physical pain. The deep maternal wound in her heart has not healed, and every word uttered to her daughter, aloud to the woman, was like cutting the edge of a knife. The lady wiped her watery eyes with a handkerchief, but in Jenny's face she read only empathy and bewilderment. "I really sympathize with you," Jenny said sincerely, "but don't take it for rudeness. I don't understand at all how I can help you with this." A faint smile appeared on Anna's face. "Your name is Jenny." "Jenny, that's right," the stewardess nodded. "Well, what does this have to do with your story?" Suddenly, the rich lady extended her hand and gently stroked her shoulder. "My daughter was also named Jenny, and she had exactly the same feature as yours. This in our family came from Grandfather John. He was the first in the family. One of the fingers was shorter than all the others, and then it was passed down to you through a generation." Anna looked at Jenny, crying and simultaneously smiling through her tears. When the stewardess realized what she meant, the world around the young woman seemed to sway, and there was no turbulence at all. You mean to say that you think that I can be your daughter, lost more than 20 years ago?" The rich lady slowly nodded her head and said, Don't just think so. I'm absolutely sure of it, Jenny. After all, everything fits. And your finger and name. And are you the right age? Jenny, how happy I am that I found you, that you are alive. In a fit of feelings, Anna could not restrain herself and wanted to hug Jenny. However, the stewardess gently stopped her movement. To say Jenny was stunned by what she heard is an understatement. It was too much even for her simple stewardess, not knowing how to pay the bandits a loan instead of her late husband. What kind of daughter of millionaires is there, by God? Sorry. But don't think that this can be just a coincidence. The young woman looked at her doubtfully. The tragic disappearance of your girl is, of course, a real grief, and I understand why you seized on my peculiarity. But I already have parents, and thank God they are alive and love me, and I love them too. The millionaire looked at her sadly, but still stood her ground. Honey, I don't know how this could happen. Perhaps you should ask your mom and dad about this. However, I still believe that you are my Jenny, my lost little daughter. If you agreed to meet me a little later, do a DNA test. Jenny sat unable to utter a word. She didn't know how to react to everything she heard. In the end, it took her a few sips of water to control her feelings. In the end, she agreed to a second meeting with Anna and took her business card with her home address. This happened after the plane had landed. So, as soon as Jenny left the airport, she immediately ordered a taxi and went to the nearest bus station, where she bought bus tickets to her native village. This woman was telling the truth. Then did that mean that Mom and Dad kept the secret of her past from her for so many years? But why did they need it? Has a lie been haunting Jenny since childhood? All these questions made her head spin. However, she was determined to find out the truth, and therefore she was looking forward to when the bus would take her to her native Penates. Adam and Marie were pleasantly surprised to see their beloved daughter Jenny on the doorstep. My soul! The happy mother fussed around the stewardess. Would you at least warn us in advance that you are going? I would bake your favorite pie with raspberries. And that one is still like that, Father said with a slight reproach. You don't take yourself at all with these flights. Do they even feed you there? Adam took the suitcase from his daughter and carried it to their beautiful log house, which the forester built himself many years ago using ancient technology without a single nail, which he was very proud of. There was a long pause when the whole family sat down in the kitchen to have tea and Jenny told them the latest news from her life. Of course, hiding from them the part that concerned the loan between relatives. There was a long pause. Parents seemed to feel that Jenny came to them for a reason. The McColbys looked at each other eloquently, but gave their daughter the right to be the first to start the conversation. Mom, Dad, Jenny began slowly, I want to tell you that I love you very much. The young woman hesitantly moved the cup from the saucer to the table and back. She was very nervous, and for the first time, did not know how to ask her parents about what was most worrying her at the moment. We love you too, daughter, Adam answered her, and it will always be so. No matter what happens, that's not what you came here for, right? Her father looked at her expressively. You, as always. See the whole point at once, Dad, Jenny said thoughtfully. And then asked directly, tell me, are you my real parents? Jenny looked at her family intently, shifting her gaze from one to the other. There was nowhere else to go. A light shadow ran across Marie's face, and her smile slowly faded. Why do you ask such questions, Jenny? The woman asked excitedly. Of course Adam and I are your parents. Who else? At that moment, the father covered his mother's hand with his hand and then in a low voice said, Oh, and I was hoping you wouldn't find out. Yes, it can be seen that the truth, sooner or later, does not seep into the light. The man shook his head doomedly, and with a glance dismissed any objections from his mother. Then he poured himself another cup of tea and took a long sip. It was a long time ago, he began, looking somewhere in the distance. Then Marie and I experienced great grief. Adam fell silent for a moment, but Marie continued for him. I had a miscarriage for the third time. I couldn't bear the baby anyway, and the doctor said that if I try again, I won't survive. Then I can die from bruising and complications. Jenny's mother exclaimed and wiped her eyes with the edge of her handkerchief. She really did not want to remember that difficult period of her life. At that time, I was constantly walking along the valley, trying in this way to relieve my grief of pain, Adam continued. And then one day, when I walked past a walnut grove, I saw you sitting on the edge of the forest and crying with burning tears. Remembering this, Jenny's father chuckled slightly. Do you think why my mother and I then called you Squirrel all the time? That's why you got such a family nickname, that you were sitting there under a walnut tree with your fluffy red pigtails and erased your face with your hands? Just a sad bastard. It was evident that Adam experienced very strong emotions while talking about it. And although not a single muscle of his father's shoulder trembled on his face, his girlfriend silently praised with all their might, suppressing their sob. You were only 3 years old then, explained the mother. As your father grabbed you in an armful, he brought you home. Marie smiled sadly with tenderness, looking at her daughter. I remember thinking even then that the Lord decided to take pity on me, finally sent me you. You were so weak with a huge scratch on your forehead. And all the time she called her mother and cried, wept endlessly. Inside, Jenny seemed to have turned everything upside down. It turns out that the woman on the plane really could be her mother. The very thought of it did not fit in her head. But how did you manage to hide my appearance from everyone? You and Dad, in fact, kidnapped me. Mom is indignant, Jenny asked, although tears, regrets, and understanding were already shining in her eyes. Marie shook her head and shook her husband's hand a little tighter. Not kidnapped. Found. These are completely different things. Maternal jealousy flashed in the woman's eyes. Well, it was necessary not to keep track of the child so that he would be lost alone in the forest and even so badly injured. This woman was a cuckoo, not a mother. The father patted his wife on the shoulder, trying to calm him down, and his daughter replied, We sold our family gold, everything that was left from my grandmother since the time of the Northern War, and we gave the money to our then sheriff as a bribe so that he would help to draw up documents for himself properly. Jenny sat in front of her parents and looked at them with sadness and love at the same time. She knew perfectly well what had prompted them to take such a desperate step. However, it didn't get any easier. How did you know we adopted you? Asked in turn squinted Adam. Marie and I did not tell anyone about this. Everyone hoped that the secrets would go with us to the grave. Jenny looked at her parents and realized that they really didn't know anything about her biological mother. During the flight, I met a woman, and the stewardess told her parents about the rich lady, at the same time showing them her business card. Adam carefully studied the card, then calmly said, Daughter, if you think that it will be right, you can meet this woman. We have no right to interfere with you. You are already an adult, an independent person. But if nevertheless you are suddenly disappointed when you learn the truth, know it. Mom and I will always be there and nothing will change for us. Doesn't matter. Whether we have the same blood or not, we will always be your parents. Jenny hugged her mother and father tightly in gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. You are my best. After staying a little longer with her parents, Jenny headed back to the city. She wanted to meet Anna, and therefore asked to replace her on the flight with one of her partners. When Anna found out that Jenny agreed to meet and take the test, fortunately, the wealthy lady knew no bounds. A few days later, the test results came in, and to Jenny's great amazement, her new acquaintance turned out to be right. Anna really was her blood mother. Upon learning of this, the millionaire immediately invited Jenny to visit her. She dreamed of showing her the house in which the young stewardess spent the first half of her childhood. When a luxury car brought Jenny to Simon's estate, the girl has never been able to contain her admiration. In her life, she had never seen such a luxury of style, which literally showed through in every piece of furniture and corner of the magnificent green garden, the mistress of the mansion. She was led into the living room, where Jenny was greeted by her birth mother. Anna looked very excited, but at the same time charming. She was wearing a long, sleeveless silk jacket and a spacious linen blouse, which, complete with the same trousers, as well as a slight blush on her cheeks, made the lady visually 10 years younger. Jenny was once again amazed, and her sense of taste in clothes is elusive to the mind. "Jenny, I'm so glad you came, dear." The woman clasped her hands. "Lord, I can't believe that. After so many years, I finally found you." Anna hugged her and her daughter, considered it wrong to reject these heartfelt hugs. It wasn't that Jenny was unhappy with the hostess's expression of parental sympathy, but that she still couldn't get used to the idea that it was this woman, and not her mother from the village, who had given her life. "Let me introduce you to someone." Anna led her daughter into a cozy small room where a man in a business suit was sitting in a wide leather armchair. Seeing Jenny, he immediately got up and extended his hand to her in greeting. "Simon." The businessman introduced himself and gently shook hands. "Sorry, you must not remember me at all, Jenny." Jenny shook her head and looked questioningly at her mother. "It's your father, Jenny." Almost crying from happiness, said Anna. Jenny scrutinizes Simon's features, but sees no resemblance to herself or her mother. Yes, and Simon himself, when they did not go into the dining room to drink tea, began to behave somehow strangely. He was nervous all the time and smiled widely, but his smile was by no means sincere. "If you only knew how scared I was then. What he experienced when he came to his senses and saw that you were not around," her father told her, woke up, and on the hood, the fire was already blazing with might and main. "I got out of the car with great difficulty. The leg was severely pinched. I thought maybe you hid somewhere near the road out of fear. But as soon as I managed to move a few meters away from the car, something exploded." The businessman spoke very emotionally, while he kept looking at his newly found daughter as if he was not at all happy about her return. Of course, Jenny didn't even know that Simon wasn't really her biological father. Simon married Anna when she was already 3 months pregnant, from her first husband, who died in an accident in a nearby town. Arthur Morgan, that was the name of Jenny's real father, made a deal with very unreliable partners who eventually faked his death at the construction site of a large residential complex. Simon, already a longtime family friend, Morganoff decided to support the inconsolable young widow and give the newborn girl his last name. In gratitude, Anna began to invite him to their house more and more often, and subsequently married Simon. In fact, her stepfather had hated Jenny since childhood. He always felt in her a possible competitor because he wanted to eventually completely capture the business of his deceased friend. And what was his amazement when, after so many years, this Jenny suddenly reappears like a ghost from the past and tries to mix all the cards for him. The most unpleasant thing for the businessman was that Anna was seriously determined to attract her daughter to her business. Anna increasingly invited Jenny to the estate, and she, of course, was glad to learn as much as possible about her past and get to know her own mother better. At the same time, the young woman did not perceive her father in any way, as if she felt that he was not her own. Anna did not say anything about this to her daughter, hoping that her and Simon's misunderstanding would disappear with time. "Anna, dear, I'm sorry, but I don't understand why you're so hung up on the idea of Jenny becoming the full owner of the stock. After all, so much time has passed, and her profession is completely different. Still, the flight attendants will not be able to turn out to be a decent business lady. Excuse me for being direct." Anna looked at her husband in bewilderment. "Simon, our Jenny Hereditary Morgan. She was raised for many years by completely different village people. But this did not prevent her from finishing school and college with honors. She is fluent in 2 languages. I'm sure if she just needs to learn a little and delve deeper into the affairs of our business, our genes will certainly take their toll." Simon tore and metal. His jaws went up and down, but he could not say anything to his wife. However, he did not intend to leave it just like that, and he began to seriously think about how he could get rid of a long-standing splinter. He didn't just want to do it. The thing was that for a long time he had his own trusted people in his wife's company, with whom he was slowly engaged in fraud and robbed the company, laundered money through third-party projects, and transferred them to personal foreign accounts. Simon planned to eventually completely subjugate the entire board of directors in order to single-handedly manage all the funds. But for this he needed to be absolutely sure that Anna would not guess anything. With the advent of Jenny in their lives, Simon's scheme was in danger of cracking, and he intended to do everything possible, only to subdue Jenny what she would never know to the underside of the parent company. Calling one of his assistants in shadow operations to his office one day, Simon told him, "It's time to take decisive action. This little stewardess has already gathered for practice in our company, and he does not understand how this can threaten the entire business." "What do you want to say, Simon?" I didn't quite understand the train of thought of my boss. His assistant, the businessman, turned to him, and a truly devilish fire danced in his eyes. "I need you to finish for me what I couldn't do years ago." Simon looked at the criminal, and he turned pale, realizing exactly what the director wanted from him. Then, the businessman continued, "The accident in which I almost crashed with my adopted daughter. I arranged everything myself. I thought getting rid of her now, while she is still small and all problems are solved. For so many years I hoped that she had disappeared, wherever she was in the forest, and would never make herself felt again. And then she appeared like a devil from a snuff box. And he wants, you see, to try to help his mother with the business." The assistant, listening to Simon, only burst with fear. He never thought that he could easily commit the most terrible crime like that. What can be in a civilized society to try to kill their own, albeit adopted child? It was already over the edge. "I can't let her take everything that I have been collecting bit by bit for so many years." The businessman finished his story. "I brought her own father, this Arthur, with those companions to eliminate him calmly so that they would not know anything. And now I have to do the same with her daughter." Simon looked pointedly at the young man in front of him. "Don't worry like that. I've thought of everything beforehand. The day after tomorrow we made an appointment in the park in the evening. I want to talk to her without witnesses, to discuss some of her prospects in our company. Well then, you yourself perfectly understand what you need to do. Just don't forget to arrange everything as if it were a banal robbery. I don't want to be suspicious." The assistant, although he was not happy with such a task, agreed. What else could he do? After all, he is a man of servitude. Jenny, without a second thought, agreed to meet with her stepfather, not even knowing what a terrible fate he had prepared for her. Late in the evening, when little space in the park was lit only by the faint light of evening lamps, Jenny stopped near the appointed meeting place with the businessman. The young woman was still unaware that Simon was not her own father, and therefore did not feel the danger emanating from him. In any case, their disagreement about her possible work in her mother's company. The woman explained to herself that they had not seen each other for too many years, so the family connection between them turned out to be much weaker than between Jenny and Anna. Jenny waited on the spot for at least half an hour before she decided to dial Simon's number. To her surprise, the mechanical voice on the other end of the line told her that the subscriber was offline. "Strange," she said aloud, and was about to go home when suddenly someone grabbed her by force from her back and covered her mouth with his hand so that she was unable to utter a sound. "Stay quiet. Otherwise they will cut you like a sheep." She heard a male voice behind her, while Jenny seemed very vaguely but still familiar. However, when the robber turned the victim to face him, Jenny's horror and shock knew no bounds. The perpetrator was her husband, Philip. He also did not expect to see his ex-wife at the place of the custom-made object. Therefore, for the first few seconds, he simply silently looked at her, speechless from amazement. Philip did not even bother to put on a mask. He was so sure that he could quietly get rid of the victim. "Philip, is that really you?" "You're alive," Jenny said with difficulty, looking her ex-husband straight in the eyes. "But how?" "You died in that fire. The investigator told me, Jenny, Philip interrupted her, still holding the woman in his steel arms. Trust me, I'm sorry this happened. But then I simply had no other choice. They would have killed me, you know. Killed me anyway. Who? Did not understand anything, Jenny. Yes. Michael with his henchmen. Philip shook her by the shoulders. I heard one of them discussing how they would bury me somewhere in the forest. About a couple of weeks after the loan was issued, so I decided to run away with the money. He faked his own death in a fire. I had to furnish them, you know? The meaning of the words spoken to the spouses slowly began to reach Jenny. So what was your plan then? She said. You leave me, get out of the water with 20 million, and I remain at the mercy of these bastards. So did you figure it all out? Jenny began to resist with all her might, trying to release Philip's tenacious embrace. Along the way, they showered him with accusations. You framed me. How could you? I loved you so much. I believed you so much. The ex-husband only pressed the woman closer to him and closed his eyes tightly. Of course, he did not expect anything like this from his work. When he set up his imaginary death from fire and disappeared for some time with the money of bandits, the man thought that in this way he completely deprived his authority with his pack of any levers of pressure on himself. But he could not imagine that they would demand his return of the debt from his wife. Just like that, all the money in a short time, and left literally with nothing. After all, he could not take the business back since he had long been considered dead. Philip somehow made himself new fake documents and got a job in Simon's company. And Simon immediately figured out that he had a fake employee in his ranks. But I decided not to fire him for the time being, knowing full well that he could use his troubles with the law against Philip himself. That's why when it came time to get his hands dirty, the businessman chose Jenny's ex-husband. And he was completely unaware of the whole story with his stepfather and his stepdaughter and his stepdaughter. And he could not even think that the woman he would need to eliminate was his ex-wife. Now Philip, more than ever, clearly understood that Jenny was the only witness to all his crimes. Therefore, he could not leave her alive. I'm sorry, Jenny. He tried to calm his wife, pressing her closer to him, and at that time he brought a long knife sparkling in the dark with his sharp blade over her back with his free hand. It's all over now, he said pointedly, and wanted to plunge the blade into the woman's body. But at that moment, with one strong movement, someone knocked the knife out of his palm, simultaneously returning it 180 degrees. The villain screamed in pain, and Jenny finally managed to release from his chokehold. She looked with horror at how some tramp in torn jeans and an old jacket was trying to lay hands on her ex-husband. Call the police quickly, he shouted to the woman, and she managed to notice that her savior was not much older than Jenny herself. She didn't need to be told twice, so Jenny immediately dialed the short number. And a few minutes later, a police squad came from the nearest post for the scoundrel. The homeless guy testified, like he was just nearby sleeping on a bench. The weather allows it, June after all. And then he heard women's screams and immediately rushed to help, because he knows that in the evenings the situation in this park is restless. As a result, the police detained Philip, and he, without a twinge of conscience, confessed during interrogation that he organized this whole story with an attempt Jenny's stepfather. Then they are shocked. Anna also found out about her daughter's loan, and Jenny herself about the fact that Simon is not her own. With the loan, by the way, a very successful police operation came out, thanks to which Michael and his entire gang were finally caught red-handed. The investigator explained to Jenny that she would have to come to a meeting about paying off the debt. By that time, the deadline given to her 2 weeks ago by authority had just come out. Although she was very afraid, she still trusted the police. A special wiretap was put on the woman, with the help of which they recorded their entire conversation with Michael. After that, a police special squad broke into the warehouse where the meeting was held, and all the villains were arrested. Seeing the money story, Jenny headed back to the park. She wanted to find and thank the homeless man who saved her life. However, she never found him. Confused, Jenny went home, and at the moment when she got out of the taxi car, she noticed a young man near her entrance with a huge bouquet of scarlet roses. I wonder who is so lucky. Jenny thought to herself with a smile as she walked past him. And at that moment, when she and the young guy caught up, the stewardess realized with surprise that she had already seen him. "Good afternoon." The homeless man, who was now dressed in a fine light gray business suit and on the bridge of his nose had stylish glasses, smiled radiantly at her. "I'm sorry that I said so unexpectedly, but I just couldn't help but see you again." Jenny stood and looked at him wide-eyed. An embarrassed smile slowly appeared on her face. "It's you. You are the tramp who saved me in the park. But how? Why are you here? You look so amazing," the guy finished jokingly for her. Yes, Jenny laughed sincerely. "That's exactly what I wanted to say." The young man explained to her that he actually works as a private psychologist, solves the mental problems of successful businessmen and show business stars. A professional need brought him to the park. Luigi, that was his name for a long time, wrote a PhD on the topic of social inequality in modern society. In order to test some of his theories in practice, he dressed up as a homeless person, hoping in this way to evaluate the reaction to himself from people from different strata. Where, if not in a huge city park, is it best to conduct such experiments? The psychologist said. Then he handed the young woman a fragrant bouquet. Jenny was kidnapped and happy at the same time. After all, the man who was not afraid to help her in a difficult, deadly moment turned out to be such an interesting and intelligent man. Luigi asked her out on a date, and Jenny happily accepted. The young people went to the opera, and after that they talked for a long time, discussing what they saw. Gradually, the conversation moved from the tetra to other areas of life, and Jenny told the young man that she worked as a flight attendant and told him how joyfully her heart sings every time she takes to the sky on an airliner. "An amazing girl, Jenny," Luigi said with a smile, "to go through so many truly shocking and tragic events. And after that, do not break down, do not lose faith in goodness and in something really high. You know, I'd really like to meet you again if you don't mind." Jenny agreed with a laugh. Of course, she too would be glad to see Luigi again. The tact and attentiveness of the young psychologist, as well as his ideal manners, left an indelible mark on her soul. Soon after, Luigi and Jenny started dating. Young people were literally fascinated by each other, and the feelings between them bloomed like a beautiful and tender lily flower. In a few months, they planned to try to move in together in the man's apartment. The couple hoped that, having lived together for some time, they would finally be sure that the wedding would be the next logical step in the development of their relationship. The only person who was not happy with happiness. Luigi and Jenny turned out to be the former fiancée of psychologist Laura. The girl still hoped to get her ex back. Although during their relationship, he and Luigi constantly quarreled, and in the end, Luigi made the decision to break up with Laura. That's just the former bride was not going to give up without a fight. She hated Jenny with all her heart that she dared to take away her beautiful, intelligent, and most importantly, very wealthy fiancé. Laura herself worked as a model, so she was well aware that sooner or later her beauty would begin to see. So she needed to get married as soon as possible, and Luigi in this respect was for her downright ideal candidate. Deciding to eliminate her rival, Laura for a long time could not think of how to furnish all this more cunningly. Finally, venturing to follow the couple to a cafe where they stopped for a bite to eat during a walk, Laura got a moment and discreetly poured several tablets, a potent sleeping pill, into Jenny's glass of juice. This was made possible thanks to an inattentive waiter who walked away for a few minutes from the counter with the order. Laura simply passed by, pretending that she was an ordinary visitor, and threw caps of pills into her rival's drink. Jenny became unwell after she drank almost half a glass. Her head began to spin violently, and the poor stewardess immediately lost consciousness. "Jenny!" Luigi rushed to her. "What's wrong with you?" Calling an ambulance, Luigi went with his beloved to the hospital, telling the doctors that he was her fiancé. Luckily, Jenny was able to be brought back to life, right in the stomach. On an additional examination, the doctor noticed something strange. "Tell me honestly, why did you take these pills?" The doctor looked at her sternly. "Did you want to get rid of the child?" "No. Well, you could at least think with your head first. If not for your fiancé, we could have lost both you and the baby." Jenny looked at the doctor with silent surprise. "I don't understand, doctor. What child are you referring to?" "I was in a cafe, only with the groom." From her face, the doctor realized that the patient did not even suspect what a surprise she had presented to her. "Your baby's life, Jenny. You are pregnant, Jenny. Congratulations. Term: 8 weeks. Jenny felt something incredible in her soul, as if all the lights of the world lit up inside her at once, illuminating the tiny life she now carried under her heart. Jenny had no doubt that it was Luigi's child, and so she immediately told him about it vividly. "But this is just wonderful news," Luigi exclaimed joyfully. "It means that we will have to hurry with the wedding. I don't want my son or daughter to be born out of wedlock." "Are you serious?" Jenny trembled with happiness. "Honey, you are the best in the world. I love you very much." After all, it's true. The young people embraced happily. However, the groom was still worried about the question of how the potent pills ended up in Jenny's glass, and having left the hospital for a cafe, he demanded to see the recordings from the surveillance cameras for the time when they were there with Jenny. And from there he immediately rushed home to Laura. But by that time, she herself had already repented of her deed. She felt especially ashamed when she found out that Jenny was expecting a baby. "Forgive me," the girl cried in the corridor, when the man came to her and severely scolded her for such a cruel and stupid act. "I didn't think that everything would be like this. Baby, he's definitely not here. Nothing to do with it. Laura, do you realize that you could have killed them both?" Luigi exclaimed angrily. "I told you then. And now once again, we will never be together again. And stop following me and doing dirty tricks to my family. Understood me? Otherwise I'll have to go to the police." Laura nodded, sobbing. "And the next day I packed all my things and left for another city." Her sense of shame was too strong. Yes, and it was unpleasant, and it was to see the joy of his ex and his happy bride. Jenny, having learned about everything from the groom, did not write a statement to Laura. She forgave the girl after Luigi told her that he saw sincere regret in the eyes of the model. Now Jenny was much more important than her own child in the wedding, rather than jealousy, attempts to take revenge on someone. Moreover, she knew from her own experience that revenge never ends in anything good. Jenny and Luigi got married. The wedding was not the loudest, but definitely the most beautiful and memorable, both for all the guests and for the newlyweds themselves. The celebration was attended by both Jenny's parents, who specially came from the ranch for this, and Luigi's parents. Jenny was happy that now she had two mothers at once. Anna did not hold a grudge against Jenny's adoptive mother and father. After all, for many years they sheltered her daughter from the possible evil that her stepfather so wanted to inflict on her. After the due date, Jenny gave birth to a wonderful daughter, whom she and her husband named Marge. Jenny stopped flying for a while, focusing on her family, and Luigi continued to work as a psychologist and a little later successfully defended his scientific work, thereby improving his qualifications and confirming his first-class professional level. Now, ahead of the Jenny family, for many years, without rebellious family happiness and security and confidence in the future. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.